The lights in the studio were too white, too bright, the kind that flattened faces and made every bead of sweat look like guilt. Michael B. Jordan sat across from the interviewer, a woman in her late 30s with perfect hair and the kind of calm smile that could slice. Cameras blinked red. Air conditioning hummed. Someone coughed behind the glass wall of the control room. The smell of coffee and disinfectant lingered. She asked the first question, her voice smooth, calculated. Michael, people say your success is impressive, considering where you came from. Do you think Hollywood just got tired of diversity talk and decided to check a few boxes? The sentence hit like a slap. Michael blinked once. Twice. His jaw tightened, but his smile stayed in place, the professional smile. The one you wear when you're too used to this kind of thing. The laughter behind the cameras was quiet, uneasy. He heard the director whisper, "Keep rolling." His pulse thudded in his ears. "I think my success comes from hard work," he said evenly. "Like anyone else's." She tilted her head, feigned curiosity. "Of course, but there are many hard-working actors. Some might say you were strategically chosen. You know, representation sells." That word, chosen, scraped like sandpaper. The room felt smaller. He could smell the sharp tang of metal from the mic stand. His throat went dry. "Representation isn't a strategy," he replied quietly. "It's reality." She smiled again, too bright. "Image him. Let's move on." But her tone lingered, sticky and smug. The next questions blurred. Every sentence came with a hidden edge. Every compliment carried a shadow. He felt his shoulders tighten, the knot in his stomach harden. His palms itched under the table. He wanted to stand up, to walk out, but years of control, of politeness drilled into him, kept him still. The lights buzzed. His reflection in the camera lens looked tired. When the interview ended, the air felt thin, like someone had sucked the oxygen out. As he stood, she reached out her hand. "Great talk, Michael. Really refreshing." He looked at her fingers, but didn't take them. "Yeah," he said, forcing a small smile. "Real refreshing." The next morning, his phone exploded with messages. Clips from the interview were already online. Edited. Cut. Twisted. The moment where he hesitated, framed with captions like, "Jordan gets defensive about race." The interviewer's face frozen in mock concern. The comments below burned. "He's playing the victim again." Typical. Why do they always make it about race? He scrolled until the words blurred. Then he threw the phone onto the couch and stared out the window. Los Angeles sunlight glared against the glass. His reflection stared back, jaw clenched, eyes hollow. Inside, something cracked. He had kept quiet too many times. He thought of his father's words years ago, when he was a kid auditioning for his first commercial. "You don't have to shout to be heard, son. But you do have to stand tall." That afternoon, his manager called. "Mike, they're spinning it. The studio's nervous. Maybe let it cool off." Michael didn't answer. His mind was already turning. The smell of stale coffee from last night clung to the air. He opened his laptop, replayed the full interview. He watched himself sit there, calm, polite, composed, while she smiled and chipped away. Something inside him hated that composure. The next day, he walked into the same building. No announcement, no PR team. Just him, a plain white t-shirt, jeans, and that same quiet intensity in his eyes. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Mr. Jordan, your interview was yesterday." "I know," he said. His voice was calm, but his presence filled the space. "I need to see her." Upstairs, the production team buzzed in surprise. The interviewer was mid-rehearsal, adjusting her notes, when he appeared at the door. The chatter died instantly. She froze. "Michael," she said, managing a thin smile. I didn't expect, I bet, he said, walking forward. The studio smelled the same. Coffee, lights, nerves, but the air was different. He was different. I watched the interview, he said. All of it. She straightened in her chair, defensive now. It was just a conversation. You edited it. He interrupted, quiet but sharp. You turned my silence into weakness. My restraint into guilt. That's not fair. Fair? His voice didn't rise, but the weight in it filled the room. You wanted a headline, not a human being. The crew stood still, watching. Someone turned off a monitor. The silence deepened. He leaned closer, just enough for her to see the exhaustion behind his calm. Do you know what that feels like? To wake up and see your name twisted into something you're not. To have a million strangers think you're angry just because you didn't smile when someone mocked your worth? She looked down at her notes. The lines of scripted control on her face began to waver. I didn't mean you did, he said, softer now. Maybe not with hate, but with habit. That's what's worse. Her eyes flicked up, glassy. The crew looked away. Michael exhaled, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. You think I got here because someone wanted to look good on paper? I worked for it. Every day. Every time someone like you smiled and asked the kind of question that wasn't really a question. His tone was steady, almost tender, but it landed like truth too sharp to ignore. She swallowed. The faint buzz of the lights filled the silence. You're right, she said finally, voice barely audible. I was unfair. I thought I was being bold, but I was just being careless. You wanted a reaction, he said. You got one. Just not the kind you planned. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she stood. Can we redo it? He blinked, caught off guard. Redo? The interview, she said. Properly. No edits. No baiting. Just honesty. He studied her face. The arrogance from yesterday was gone. What remained was something raw, uncertain, human. Slowly he nodded. One condition, he said. We talk about what really happened. On camera. She hesitated, then nodded. When the cameras rolled again, the lights seemed softer. No makeup touch-ups, no rehearsed lines. Just two people at a table, the weight of truth between them. She began, her voice trembling slightly. Yesterday, I asked questions I thought were challenging. But I crossed a line. I turned a man's story into a spectacle. And I want to start by apologizing. Michael looked at her, then at the camera. We all make mistakes, he said. The question is what we do after. The air in the studio shifted. Every sound, the hum of the lights, the faint click of a pen, the quiet breathing of the crew, felt charged, alive. For the next hour, they spoke not as interviewer and guest, but as two people trying to understand. About race. About dignity. About silence. He told her how every pause in that first interview had been a battle between fury and composure. How the pressure to be the right kind. A black man on TV, articulate, patient, unshakably polite, was its own kind of cage. She listened, really listened, her eyes flicking down when his words cut too close. You shouldn't have to carry that, she said softly. No, he replied. But I do. And so do millions of others. The final minutes of the new interview were quiet. No grand gestures. Just truth. When it ended, the crew clapped once, quietly, like something sacred had been said aloud for the first time. As Michael stood, she reached out her hand again. This time, he took it. Her grip trembled. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. Just listen next time. Outside, the late afternoon light poured through the glass, warm and forgiving. The city buzzed below. Somewhere, the old clip was still circulating online, But by evening, so was the new one. The headline read, Michael B. Jordan returns and redefines what strength looks like. In the comments, something strange was happening. People weren't arguing. They were reflecting, sharing stories, listening. That night, Michael sat on his balcony, the sky burning orange over the city. The air smelled of jasmine and smoke. He closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel like silence, it felt like peace. And somewhere in that peace he smiled, not because he won, but because he'd stayed human. The next morning began with a silence that felt heavier than sleep. The sunlight cut through his blinds like thin blades, slicing across the posters and books that filled his apartment. Michael B. Jordan sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee untouched, scrolling through headlines that all seemed to shout the same message. Michael B. Jordan confronts racism again. The old interview was still viral, but now it was fighting for attention with a new one, the one he had insisted on redoing. Some called it redemption. Others called it damage control. But none of them knew what it had cost him to walk back into that studio. The words from yesterday still echoed in his mind. The interviewer's apology, her trembling voice, the way she looked at him when she realized that her so-called questions weren't questions at all, but a form of quiet violence. He should have felt proud, maybe even vindicated. Instead, all he felt was the dull throb of exhaustion behind his eyes. His phone buzzed. His manager's name flashed on the screen. Mike, the voice came through, hurried and sharp. The network wants you back on air tonight. A panel discussion. They're calling it The Conversation Continues. He exhaled slowly. And who's on the panel? 2 network anchors, a sociologist, and her. The interviewer. Silence. He let it hang there long enough for the meaning to settle. You're kidding, he said. They want ratings, Mike. They saw the numbers from yesterday. They want the tension back. But this time, you're in control. He hated that word, control. It made him feel like an exhibit. Still, he said yes. He always said yes. By 6 in the evening, he was standing again under the same fluorescent lights, the studio colder this time, as if it too remembered. The set was redesigned. A semicircle of sleek chairs, a massive screen behind them showing the title in white letters. The Conversation Continues. The interviewer sat 2 seats away, her face neutral but pale, a folder in her lap. Their eyes met briefly. No smile. No hostility. Just awareness. The sociologist, a middle-aged black woman named Dr. Fields, leaned over and whispered, You ready for this? I've been ready my whole life, Michael murmured. When the camera started rolling, the air thickened. The anchor began with the same polished tone. Tonight, we revisit a moment that sparked national debate. Actor Michael B. Jordan's interview went viral after a candid discussion on race and representation. We're here to unpack what happened and what it means. Michael watched himself on the big screen for a moment, the still frame of him sitting across from the interviewer, eyes steady, lips pressed tight. The anchor turned to him. Michael, let's start with you. What was going through your mind during that interview? The lights burned hot against his skin. He took a breath. I was thinking, he said slowly, that I was tired. Not of questions, but of what those questions meant. I've been asked my whole life to explain why I'm here, as if my presence needs justification. A murmur went through the room. Dr. Fields nodded gently. That's a familiar exhaustion, she said. It's the fatigue of having to translate your humanity for others. The anchor turned to the interviewer. Would you like to respond? She hesitated. I know, I let my words do harm. I thought I was being provocative, pushing boundaries. But I wasn't listening. I was performing. Michael watched her face as she spoke. There was no arrogance now, only a fragile honesty. It's hard, she continued, to realize that the same confidence that got me here also blinded me to what I was doing. The anchor leaned in. Do you think this kind of conversation between those who experience racism and those who unconsciously perpetuate it can actually change anything? Dr. Field smiled faintly. Change starts with discomfort, she said. If everyone's comfortable, no one's learning. Michael looked at the camera lens, the single red light blinking like a heartbeat. I don't want to be comfortable anymore, he said. Comfort is what lets people pretend things are fine. His words hung in the air. For the first time all night, the studio felt still, almost reverent. Then the anchor shifted, breaking the silence. Some viewers, he said carefully, feel this has been blown out of proportion. They argue that race shouldn't always be part of the conversation. Michael turned toward him, expression calm but cutting. That's easy to say when the conversation isn't about you, he said. The anchor blinked, thrown off. Excuse me? When you've never had to think about whether your skin color affects how people hear your voice, see your face, or judge your talent, then of course you want to move on. But moving on without understanding isn't progress, it's denial. The audience behind the camera shifted, the air almost crackling. Even the anchor didn't speak for a moment. Michael felt his pulse steady, strong, anchored. He realized he wasn't angry anymore. He was awake. The interviewer looked at him, eyes glossy. Can I ask you something? Go ahead, he said. Why did you come back yesterday? You could have ignored it. You could have moved on. He studied her face for a long moment before answering. Because silence doesn't protect anyone, he said. It just makes the wound invisible. She nodded slowly, her throat tight. The anchor gestured for the clip to roll again. The screen behind him flickered, showing the moment from yesterday when she apologized. The rawness in her voice was undeniable. When the clip ended, the anchor turned to the audience. This, what you're seeing, is rare. It's uncomfortable. But maybe that's what makes it important. The show ended without fanfare. The credits rolled over quiet music. When the lights dimmed, Michael stood, the tension draining from his body. Crew members moved around, dismantling cables and cameras, murmuring quietly. The interviewer approached him, holding her phone. Can I show you something? She asked. On the screen was a flood of messages, hundreds of them, from viewers. Some angry, yes, but most were different, thoughtful, reflective. People are actually talking, she said softly. Not shouting. Talking. He looked at the screen, scrolling slowly. That's something, he murmured. She hesitated. Michael, I want to thank you. Not for forgiving me, but for showing up. He gave a small smile. You showed up too. For a moment, they stood in the quiet hum of the empty studio, the tension replaced by something fragile but real. Later, outside, the night air felt cleaner. The city glowed below, restless and alive. Michael walked down the street without a destination, just breathing. His phone buzzed again. Social media notifications, news articles, invitations to speak on talk shows, but he ignored them. Tonight wasn't about noise. It was about meaning. He passed a cafe with a TV in the corner. The rerun of the panel discussion was playing. Two young men at a table were watching, one of them shaking his head. Man, the guy said, he really handled that with class. The other nodded. Yeah. He didn't yell. He just made her think. Michael paused outside, unseen, the soft light from the cafe brushing against his face. For the first time in years, he felt something like peace. Not the peace of victory, but of clarity. Back home, he poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and opened his laptop. An email notification blinked from the network, an offer to produce a new series called The Conversation, hosted by him. He read it twice, then closed the screen. He didn't need to decide tonight. He just wanted to breathe. The sound of the city below, horns, laughter, footsteps, merged into a low hum. He thought of his father again, of that line he used to say, "You don't have to shout to be heard, son. But you do have to stand tall." He smiled. The next morning, when he finally agreed to the new show, he added one condition. Every episode had to feature someone willing to confront their own bias on camera. No scripts. No edits. Just truth. The network hesitated, but the world was watching now. They said yes. Weeks later, on the first day of filming, he walked into the same studio where everything had started. The walls had been repainted, the lights softened. The interviewer, now his co-host, was already there, setting up her notes. She looked up when he entered and smiled. "You ready?" "Always," he said. The cameras rolled. The red light blinked, and somewhere beyond that lens, millions of people watched as two voices began again, this time not as adversaries, but as allies. The first question she asked him was simple, honest. "What does dignity mean to you?" He took a breath. "It means standing up, even when the world tells you to sit down," he said. "It means knowing who you are when someone else tries to tell your story for you." The room fell quiet again, not with tension this time, but with understanding. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the glass, the city lights blurring like memories. Michael looked straight into the camera, his voice low but unshakable. "Dignity isn't given," he said. "It's reclaimed." And as the rain kept falling, somewhere deep inside, he felt the weight he had carried for years finally begin to lift. The rain had not stopped since dawn, tapping against the glass windows of the studio like a heartbeat that wouldn't fade. Michael B. Jordan stood backstage, waiting for the cue, the soft hum of crew voices mixing with the static of live broadcast prep. Months had passed since the night he confronted his interviewer, and in those months, the conversation had become more than a show. It had become a mirror, uncomfortable, unfiltered, and necessary. Every episode peeled back a layer of silence, each guest forced to face something raw. But tonight was different. Tonight's topic was him. The producers had convinced him it was time. The network wanted an introspective finale, a closing arc to the season. "We started with you," the interviewer, now his co-host, Melissa, had said softly. "So it makes sense that we end with you." He had agreed, not out of vanity but out of a quiet understanding that his story had never really ended, it had only paused. The studio lights flickered to life. The smell of wet asphalt drifted in from the alley outside each time the door opened. The audience, smaller this time, intimate, whispered among themselves. Michael rolled his shoulders, adjusting the mic on his lapel. He caught his reflection in the black glass of a camera lens. Calm, steady, older somehow. The floor manager counted down with her fingers. 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on. Melissa's voice carried that careful balance of professionalism and warmth that viewers had come to trust. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight marks the final episode of the conversation. For months, we've discussed what it means to see, to listen, and to change. And tonight, we turn the lens inward to the man who started it all, Michael B. Jordan." The camera panned to him. Applause rippled softly. He smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed serious. "You've told so many stories on this show," she said, "helped so many people confront themselves. But I think it's time to ask, what did all of this do to you?" He exhaled slowly. "It made me tired," he said, the honesty raw enough to silence the audience. "But it also made me human again. For a long time, I was surviving on image. Control. The idea that if I played my part right, I could avoid the ugliness. But I realized, dignity isn't silence. It's the courage to speak when you're shaking. Melissa nodded, her expression soft. Do you think people understood that from the beginning? No, he said simply. They wanted a headline, not healing. But some of them stayed. They listened. That's enough. The air in the studio was still. The lights seemed dimmer tonight, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. Melissa leaned forward slightly. Can I ask something I've never asked you on air? You can ask anything. That day, the first interview. When I said those things, when I pushed you, why didn't you walk away? His gaze dropped for a moment, then lifted, steady and calm. Because if I had walked away, you'd have felt justified. You'd have said, see? He's angry. You were waiting for that reaction. I decided to give you the one thing you didn't expect, dignity. The audience barely breathed. Melissa swallowed hard, eyes glistening under the lights. You changed me that day, she said quietly. You didn't humiliate me. You made me see myself. We all have to see ourselves, he replied, even when it hurts. The sound booth was silent. The crew leaned in, listening not like workers, but like witnesses. Melissa hesitated, then reached for the next question card, but stopped halfway. You know what? She said. Forget the script. She set the card down. Tell me about the first time you realized the world saw you differently. He smiled faintly, almost sadly. It wasn't in Hollywood, he said. It was in high school. I got pulled over on my way to basketball practice. I was 16. The officer asked if the car was mine. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get my license out. That was the first time I felt invisible and exposed at the same time. Melissa looked at him, her hand resting on her chin. And that feeling never left? It changes shape, he said. Sometimes it's a question in an interview. Sometimes it's a comment about being so articulate. Sometimes it's silence, the kind that says, we're done listening. His voice softened. But you learn to turn pain into perspective. The audience watched him as if afraid to blink. Rain streaked down the glass behind them, catching the city lights like slow tears. Melissa took a breath. Michael, there's something I've wanted to say publicly. He tilted his head slightly, curious. Go ahead. She looked directly into the camera. When I first met you, I thought I understood this world. I thought I could ask hard questions without consequences. But I didn't understand how deep my blind spots ran. You didn't know me grace, but you gave it anyway. And I think, no, I know, that changed not just this show, but me. Michael was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, Grace isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. The control room was dead quiet. Even the air seemed to pause. Melissa blinked away a tear. I used to think journalism was about control, she said. Now I think it's about humility. He nodded. We're all still learning. Then came the twist, the producer's voice crackling through the earpiece. Michael, we have a surprise guest. He frowned slightly, but Melissa smiled knowingly. From the shadows of the backstage corridor stepped an older man, gray hair, slow stride, the kind of calm that carried decades. It was his father. The audience gasped. Michael froze. Dad? The old man smiled, eyes shining with quiet pride. You think I wasn't gonna come see what my boy's been doing? Laughter and applause rippled softly. Michael stood, hugged him. The man's embrace was firm, grounding. You taught me everything I said on this show, Michael whispered. His father chuckled. I just told you the truth. You're the one who lived it. Melissa watched, smiling through tears. Mr. Jordan, you once told your son he didn't have to shout to be heard. Do you still believe that? The elder Jordan nodded slowly. Yeah, but I think I left something out. You don't have to shout, But you can't whisper either. The world's loud, son. You gotta speak up when it matters. The audience clapped softly again, but Michael's face was wet with something more than gratitude. It was release. The moment stretched like an eternity, father and son, past and present, the echo of everything unsaid finally finding air. When they sat back down, Melissa turned to the camera. Maybe this is what the show was always about, she said quietly. Not confrontation, not guilt, but truth, spoken without shouting. Michael looked at her, then at his father, then at the audience. The thing about dignity, he said, is that it's not given by others. You build it, one choice at a time, even when no one's watching. Outside, thunder rolled far off, soft and low. The red light on the camera blinked, signaling the final seconds of the broadcast. Melissa smiled faintly. Any last words before we close the season? He looked straight into the lens, eyes clear. Listen before you judge. See before you label. Understand before you speak. Because silence, he paused, is not always peace. Sometimes it's just the sound of people giving up. The red light faded. Applause filled the studio, but it was different this time, warmer, truer. Crew members hugged quietly, some wiping their eyes. Melissa turned to him. You did it, she said softly. No, he corrected, smiling gently. We did it. Later that night, after everyone had left, he stood alone in the empty studio. The lights were off except for one, casting a single beam across the chair where he had sat. The air smelled of rain and electric dust. He walked to the window, looked out at the city reflecting itself in puddles. His reflection in the glass was double, one face in the studio light, one lost in the night. The man who had entered this building months ago, seeking to defend himself, was gone. The man who remained had nothing to prove. He picked up his jacket, glanced once more at the silent set, and whispered, Thank you. The next morning, the headlines read, Michael B. Jordan ends the conversation, but starts a movement. Across social media, clips of the final episode spread. His father's words, Melissa's apology, his final message about dignity. But for Michael, none of that mattered as much as the quiet he felt now, the quiet of truth spoken, not shouted. In the days that followed, strangers stopped him on the street, not to praise him, but to tell him their own stories. I watched your show with my son. I realized I'd been part of the problem. I finally listened. He smiled at each of them, not as a celebrity, but as a man who had finally learned that dignity wasn't in how others saw him, it was in how he saw himself. And when the rain came again a week later, he stepped outside without an umbrella, let it soak his skin, cold and clean. Somewhere in that rain, he felt something new, something like freedom.